Another episode, another day, another time.
Yes,
it's Robert,
indeed.
Brandon, digging deeper. I always like doing these with you.
It's fun.
It's awesome. Yeah.
I have a certain affection, compassion, you might say, for these things.
I like where you're going.
Yeah, because that's what you talked about yesterday. You talked about compassion. Really good message, like really powerful. I think it hit home for me. Just the idea of how a lot of us have kind of lost our compassion quotient. You know, this idea of like our capacity for compassion seems to be waning. And you kind of cited a bunch of reasons why. Some of your angst towards social media and some of that too.
As people are watching on social media.
Yeah. So thank you for watching on social media.
No, I'm just relationship.
That's awesome. That's so funny. But, so you kind of talked about some of those things, but I want to know, the insider look on Brandon Grant. What are the things that are kind of hard for you to be compassionate toward? What are the things that you're like, it is hard for me to be compassionate towards these people?
Oh, well, I think we just spent about 15 minutes before this podcast that I already kind of shared. Gosh, really?
Yeah. Where is it hard for you to be compassionate? I'll share some of mine.
Why don't you start and then I'll think through it. Go ahead.
I'll tell you, if I feel like I've been wronged by someone, it's hard for me to then have compassion towards them. And the dangerous part for me is a lot of times, like if you're in apartment living, sometimes it's your neighbors. Yeah. Because you're like, I feel like they're under my skin or something like that. But especially if I feel like they have wronged someone that I care about or love, because I have this protective thing in me that maybe it's that Enneagram 8 thing. I don't know. But it's this protective, high justice type of sense in me that kind of makes it hard for me to have compassion towards people that I've already labeled in my head as wrongdoers or something like that, right? Yeah. Or like there's a certain sense of victory that happens when the guy who cut you off on the freeway, you see getting pulled over later on. So stuff like that, it's hard. I'm like, there's no compassion for that dude, right? Yeah. Like enjoy your BMW 3 Series, man. Like you just got a ticket,
That seems like a little bit of...
Is that specific?
Yeah, I mean, that's very specific. That seems like a little bit of jealousy in there too.
Oh, man.
Do you want a BMW 3 Series?
That'd be awesome.
I don't even know what that is.
But no, it wasn't. So it's from an actual story. So.
Similarly, if I'm misrepresented by somebody, then I have trouble wanting to be compassionate towards that person because I feel like, for me, honor is a big value. So if I feel dishonored or I sense that somebody has dishonored somebody else, I struggle at times wanting to give compassion because I feel like when someone's honorable to another person, then they deserve that compassion more so. Yeah. So that's probably an area that I struggle with. And this is very subjective, but foolish decision making, like when there's just things where you're like, that was just dumb. Yeah. Like I want to be compassionate, but like at the same time, and maybe I'll find myself compassionate the first or the second time of dumb decisions.
Dumb decisions over and over
But
again.
when they repeatedly do the same thing, you're just like, dude, I kind of just want you to have to wallow in your own mess, and hopefully then you'll make a difference and change because this is just ridiculous. And so sometimes, in terms of, I don't know, like in people's marriages or raising kids or even just what they do with their money or their time, like I'll hear things, and yes, I empathize with them. I want to help, but then there are some things that just, maybe it's a value deal, or maybe I'm just like, oh gosh, that was just so stupid. And I know that what I think is stupid is subjective compared to somebody else.
No, I think that's relatable. Yeah. I mean, even with my own kids sometimes, right? If they keep on doing the same dumb thing over and over again. Yeah. And they get hurt or in trouble from it, I'm kind of like, see? Yeah, it's hard to have compassion and be like, okay, let's talk about this. Well, on the other side of that coin, where do you have a soft spot in your heart? Like, what are the things that you're just like, man, if this comes across my path, man,
I would say when people are not accurately represented or not invited to certain conversations, when people are looked down upon, looked past, I have a soft spot when, like I always, not because I'm a pastor, but like I always survey the room when I'm places and I see who's not somehow in a circle with people. Yeah, and I want to make sure and bring people into that circle. So, because that just seems like it sucks to be by yourself and not being welcomed. I definitely feel like when people are dishonored, when people come from circumstances that are beyond even their control, that my heart breaks for them. Yeah. I think people in impoverished circumstances. And sometimes that happens in the United States. There's a lot of people that, I mean, my heart goes out towards, but I probably even more so in third world countries when they don't have all the amenities and resources at their disposal. Like I have a soft, compassionate heart for the downtrodden and homeless and even poor, marginalized people here in the United States. But because we have such robust infrastructure with governmental programs and food stamps, and there's always opportunities where in some places there's just not those opportunities. And that's where I really have my heart kind of leap out of my chest. And it's like, man, how can we help in some way? Or, even this earthquake in Turkey and Syria that we've talked about. It's like those people were born in a place that did not have the proper infrastructure to withstand a 7.8 magnitude earthquake. They have a corrupt government, and now their family's shattered. They're freezing in the cold. It's like, oh my gosh, like how could we not try to do something in this moment? Because it's just like this came and happened to them, and they didn't bring about anything that caused it. So
I think you're pointing to something though too, because something very relatable to where we're at right now is, you kind of mentioned this in your message the other day. We are at a church where through our parking lot, as we're doing this podcast, there's probably 3 people that have walked by.
The homeless highway.
That live in the drainage ditch kind of right behind as well, or at least they're staying there. I don't know if they live there or what's going on. Sometimes I'm kind of like, I found myself when I first got here, like being like, oh man, like how do we help?
Yeah.
What's going on? Like, what are these people's stories? And now I'm kind of like, what are they doing? Are they breaking into Jean's car? Like, what's happening?
Hey, I kept that inconspicuous yesterday in the message. I said a staff member. Now
everybody knows. So
because our church is so compassionate. Now Jean, someone's going to give him a new car. Someone's going to help him. See,
his car's fine.
His car's fine. Okay. He just needs what do you call it? A BMW 3 Series.
He needs an M3. Okay, something like that. But that's awesome. So I mean, like when it comes to things that are that close to home, that's when it makes some of the biggest differences. I know that you were even challenging me a little bit on that, of like, sometimes it's harder to be compassionate. And this is just our conversation, kind of off the cuff, but it's harder to be compassionate with the people that you see every day. It's harder to also speak truth to the people you see every day. Like there's more like consequence that happens with that. I mean, there's a lot of consequence with what happens with the people that are going through our parking lot. If we started to like feed every person who came by, that it might congregate a lot of other people that would come here, and there's all kinds of different things. How do you go about showing compassion and maintaining boundaries at the same time? Or what does that even look like?
That's a great question. I'm actually probably going to try to touch on it a little bit this next week.
Good.
And continue looking at the full human Jesus, like that there are times Jesus said no. And so this week I'm going to talk about just why and when Jesus said no. And sometimes that was saying no to people who were coming to him expecting an act of compassion in their direction.
Yeah.
I think that you can't do things for every single person, but you can always do something for at least one person, right? And I heard an expression a long time ago, like, do for one what you wish you could do for all. And so, I don't go out and try to help every homeless person that walks across our parking lot.
Yeah.
But I do try to reoccurring once a week, once every other week, try to help at least one.
Yep.
Because I don't want my heart to get completely hardened in that.
Absolutely.
I also I really try to pause and pray. Like, is this someone you want me to try to help and extend compassion? And when someone comes in, sometimes like it's not me going to somebody. Sometimes it's like you run into someone or you walk past someone in the street or whatever the case is. I always want in those moments to at least extend compassion in my demeanor and my time and my attitude. It might not always be in my resources in that moment, but I just rather would I don't know what's the word, like fall to the side of compassion than lack of compassion in those instances.
Compassion bias rather than a skeptic bias.
Right. Yeah. Right. This is just transparent. Where I find sometimes the most difficult place to be compassionate, and I wrestle, is being the leader of Rise City Church and having a staff.
Oh man, explain that.
Because in the secular world, right? Like, and I have a business degree. So there's times I'm like, I wonder what it'd be like to operate there. And I talk to my friends who lead companies or stuff like that. Like, they don't have to have compassion if performance isn't there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's based upon your performance. It's based upon your efforts. And okay, sorry, things happen at home. Sorry, whatever. You're still late, or whatever the case may be. And like, I'm just saying, like, in these moments, like when you're leading, there's that side of me at times. It's like, well, there's this organizational part to run, but we're Christians,
Yes.
And so, and I've talked to my pastor friends too, and like, where's the line of compassion and empathy and help and flexibility, but also leading and seeking efficiency and stewardship. And those are moments at times where I can feel the tension of, is this a moment I need to lean into with compassion as a brother in Christ to my fellow employee who's also a brother or sister in Christ? Or is this a moment where it's like, this is a job related situation that like you need to get through it, or you need to do better at it. And so, most of my problems are with you, Robert.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we can get this out in the open. Man, you heard it here first. Okay.
No,
so,
I'm just kidding.
Listen, I'm going through a lot in my life.
I have in 20 years, like that, and that's the hard part. Like, because you interact with people in your church who are businessmen or businesswomen, and you hear the way they go about things. You're like, yeah, I can't do that. Like, one that just, I don't know if I feel like in my Christian ethic that seems right. And even my context, if I did, I think that I'd be like raked to the coals on that one, because I wouldn't be supposedly showing the love of Jesus. And so it's, that's a real tension at times that I feel. I really do.
You're running like a church that necessitates some business.
But when you take a step back, right? Like in just most, crass terms, like I lead a $2 million organization with 20 plus employees.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I don't look at it like that.
Sure.
But when you talk to friends and that are not even church-based, that's how they look at it. It's like, so how would you manage this? And how would you be effective in this? And what would you do in that? And compassion is not on their radar a lot of the times. And I think that's a problem in and of itself.
Yeah, I do too.
I think that they would have better staff environments if compassion and empathy were implemented into their environments.
Yeah.
But I would lie if I said at times I wrestle with like, okay, like even with Jesus, his crowd started to come and he went from 3 to 12 followers to even the 72. Mm-hmm. Like, did his compassion quotient at times versus his expectation quotient kick in more as they started to really create a movement? I don't know. I chew on those things.
I think it's a good thing to chew on.
Yeah.
So, especially in a world where, let's be honest, our churches sometimes can look like businesses, and if we're not careful, they can become more businesses than they are churches.
Yep.
And we can actually start to leverage the idea of ministry just so that we can run a more effective business, and that's, to me,
and I don't want that.
No,
I don't want that ever for who we are.
So I appreciate that you're wrestling with that. That's good. And then I'll do better. I'm so sorry.
Please do.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned, speaking of the compassion of Jesus, you gave a ton of examples. Actually, you didn't give a ton. You gave a few examples in the Bible. A ton. It was crazy. It's like 4. But no, you gave a few examples of Jesus' compassion on display. But you seem to really hone in on one.
The leper?
The healing of the leper.
Yeah. Why?
Was there something like in your past, in your experience, in your heart that just made you gravitate to that example?
I just think that example encapsulates the very people that I probably want to extol compassion on the most in the society. Because the leper was the outcast, the marginalized, the dishonored, the embarrassed, the lonely, the numb.
It is.
It was all of those things in one. And I have done a message before from a first person perspective where I acted like I was the leper. And that was transformational for me, because I put myself in the situation of a man who had a family, and then as he was kind of washing his hands, started to see the soap being tinged red, and he realized that he had a kind of a sore on his hand. And in that time, the absolute dread and fear that would come upon him, seeing that sore, and whether or not this very sore is going to result in him having to be completely removed from his family.
Yeah.
And just honestly, sometimes, being frank, some of the skin disease commands that they operate off of that were in the Bible and are in the Bible just seemed so harsh.
It does seem harsh.
And like, holy cow, you want to talk about trauma. And so those are the areas for me that I think my compassion quotient kicks up a notch. And so when I think of the leper, I think of so many people in our society I wouldn't say that I personally have felt like I am the leper. That's drawn me there, but my heart goes out in that direction. So that's probably why I emphasized him the most.
Yeah, it makes sense actually with what you even mentioned earlier about kind of having a soft spot in your heart for those that have been labeled, no fault of their own, and kind of been pushed into this like circle for people that maybe pushes them outside of the circles and makes them feel left out and makes them feel hurt and traumatized, all those types of things. So that makes sense actually. Yeah. So that's insightful. Well, you mentioned also embracing Jesus's compassion for yourself as kind of like a big step for it, for really kind of then showing the compassion of Jesus through your life. Was there a time in your life when you embraced Jesus' compassion? And did it come from a place of you needing it because you're in pain? Or was it like what did it look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, the place that I first embraced Jesus' compassion is when I was arrested for drinking and driving at 18. And to actually hear and then feel like I tangibly felt and received like forgiveness. Yeah. When I knew I had made a decision that wasn't wise. That was probably one of my first like experiences. And I felt it from the church that I was invited to attend, because in my small town, 5,000-6,000 people, everybody knows everybody. And so it was obvious like, oh, there's the kid that got arrested, because it's right on the front page of the newspaper, courthouse news. And so for them to welcome me into the church and no one bring it up and people welcome and love me and stuff like that was formative, very early on for me in my walk, along with what I shared yesterday as far as going to Juarez, Mexico and building a home for a family. I had this moment driving home from Juarez, processing everything, and I felt inside of my soul like this. Maybe say the voice of God just kind of say, in the same way you just built a home for this family in need, I have provided a way for you to have permanent security now and forever. And at that time, I'm still wrestling with being arrested. I'm still wrestling from going to follow Jesus. I'm still talking like a sailor, all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, and I just had this moment, I was like, wow, I don't know, is this God? And if it is God, like, you're extending compassion in my direction in spite of me. Yeah. And it was moving for me.
I can identify with that. I think I remember looking for acceptance and looking for, redemption, forgiveness, all those types of things. Just trying to find something. And what God gave me was identity instead. And that was huge for me. And I hear that in your story too, of he didn't just give you forgiveness. He said, no, I've actually created a security for you for the rest of eternity. Like I've given you a new identity. I've made all things new in this. It was something that was bigger than I was even asking for or looking for. And that's what really kind of changed me in a big way. I love that we're not drawn to repentance by his like harshness, but rather by his loving kindness is what the Bible says. And so I've experienced that and it sounds like you have too. And
it's that was the beginning, but there's been many moments over the last 20 plus years following him that I've sensed his mercy and compassion in my life, and I continue to cling to it. And in times when it's because of my own idiocy and I've done something I regret, or I've experienced his compassion in a tangible way when my dad died, and really clinging to 2 Corinthians 1, that God of comforts you in your time of need. And he doesn't have to, but in that moment I didn't have a father. And so I looked at God now as a father to the fatherless, and that was compassion I embraced. And so there's different ways and times that I've definitely embraced his compassion.
And I don't know about you, and I do know about you. You would want our church to be marked as a church of compassion. To be like that church that you experienced when you showed up, that was that embraced you, even though you were in the middle of this smear on your reputation or whatever else it looked like, and just accepted you for it. I think churches all around the U.S. had a big opportunity through COVID. Right? Like there was like this big test.
What was that? COVID?
It was this pandemic thing that happened for a couple of years now.
I forgot about that. I kind of blocked it out of my mind.
I don't mean to bring up any trauma, but I'm going to.
Here we go, Robert. Let's go.
Let's relive it for a second. Everyone with me, okay?
Put your mask on. Wait. Is it too soon to say that?
I don't know. I'm going to take a shot at it.
Okay.
What? Oh, come on. This is too far. Anyway, here's what we're going to do. So,
jeez, we just got canceled.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
go
we
ahead.
did just get canceled, but it's okay. So, one thing that I noticed in the middle of the pandemic was everything was shut down except for compassion when it comes to churches. Churches weren't able to meet legally, for worshiping and for worship services and for sermons and for all the things that we love to do. But we were able to open up our parking lots to distribute food, to take care of families, to make sure that people that didn't have toilet paper could get toilet paper or eggs or whatever else it looked like. Man,
you still can't get eggs. I went to Costco last night and there's no eggs.
I know.
Where's the eggs at?
I don't know.
Anyway, go ahead. Sorry, but I was like, I just had that last night. I went to go get eggs. It was like, there's no eggs.
There's only a dozen places in San Diego. I'm just stupid.
Wow. Okay. But what's your point, man? Come on.
But we learned that the only thing that really, from the outside watching world, that really deemed the church as essential at that moment was the compassion that we had and that we showed. I wonder, do you think that we have learned from that and continue to live that out post-pandemic now? I want to say we're post-pandemic, I hope. Do you feel like we're continuing to live that out? Do you feel like we have been shaped by it, motivated by it, inspired by it?
We as in Rise City, or we the church, Large C?
Let's do both. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, both Large C Church and Rise City Church. Or did we just kind of go back to business as usual as before? And either way, why? Why not?
It's a great question. I would say for Rise City, I just think certain times bring about different parts of who you are.
Okay.
Different parts of your personality come out in different situations. So like, I'm not always highly enthusiastic about everything, but there are times you're going to see a lot of enthusiasm come out from me because a part of who I am. Same thing with lamentations or lamenting and having grief. I mean, like I'm doing a funeral tomorrow. That side of me will be displayed because it's real. I later in the afternoon, I'm not probably going to be grieving as much. So I think that for us as a church, I think compassion is baked into who we are.
Yeah.
I think it's been a part of us for 10 years. So I think it got accentuated in the pandemic and seen to be more prominent because that's what was needed. But we have probably went back to business as usual, which has elements and times and emphases of compassion, but it's not the only thing that we do.
That's good.
Perhaps there's an argument to be made that it should be more of what we do. I don't know. As far as the Big C Church, that's a hard question because that's a global question.
I know.
So
what do you see?
I think most churches went back to business as usual.
Okay.
Yeah,
but it's not necessarily like a bad thing. It's
no,
just,
I don't, because I don't think there's all these churches that are lacking compassion or not doing things. I think that the very fact that, as you mentioned, like that the thing that was permitted for churches was to continue to be compassionate tells you there's a reputation that churches do things that are marked with compassion.
Yeah.
That the government said that, so like that they know that and allow that says that that's a part of who they've been and what they've done. And so to go back to business as usual means they're still going to be compassionate in what they do, hopefully.
Obviously it was a mark from before.
Yeah.
That continued in the middle of a need. And
Yeah.
So it was big in that sense.
Yeah. So no, maybe backside of the pandemic, there's more selective compassion because I feel like sometimes churches have now become more sided, so to speak, with different types of people or vantage points or political entities. And to me, that stinks because there's compassion that's biased in the direction of certain types of people at the expense of others. And I think that's not a good thing.
No.
So.
Well, and in fact, actually, I think that sometimes limits compassion too.
Yeah.
Which is what you're saying. But
yeah.
Well, so let's kind of wrap this up because, I mean, obviously we talked about how, you talked about how empathy and compassion are a bit different, right?
Yeah.
Compassion is active, right? Jesus reached out and touched people and stuff like that. You kind of honed in on that as well. And so I want to know if I'm part of Rice City Church. I am part of Rice City Church. But what is my next step? Like as an individual and as a gathering, how do we live out being actively compassionate right now?
I think compassion is more effective when it's not programmed.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you're a part of ICD Church or you're just a follower of Jesus, the next step of compassion is look in front of you to those around you who you can stand beside, empathize with, and as you hear their suffering, their pain, whatever they're going through, prayerfully consider how can you perhaps make a difference. Doesn't mean you're the answer.
Yeah.
That it's not to try to have a Messiah complex and say, hey, here, I'm coming for you and I'm going to give you compassion, help you. Like it is, the empathy piece is, empathy is important because it starts with a listening ear, which then hopefully moves from your brain down to your heart, or even we talked about yesterday, maybe down into your bowels, into your guts, and then beginning to let it kind of come back up to figure out ways to respond.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's important. And this is kind of my bias. Yes, it's important to, right now I'd say, give money to people in Turkey and Syria, and help in that situation, or go work at a soup kitchen, or go on one of our teams to Mexico and build a home. Like I'd advocate for those things, but I think the most practical and even pressing and maybe even necessary form of compassion is, if you're a husband out there, be compassionate to your wife. And if you're a wife out there, be compassionate to your husband. If you're a boyfriend or a girlfriend, husband, or father, mother, all those, like I mentioned those yesterday, like be compassionate to the person that cut you off.
Yeah.
And you might not be able to like be active, but one of the ways you're active is by not being active. Keep your finger down. You know what I mean? Like that's compassionate to be like, all right, man, whatever. Like, cause I don't know what they're going through. I don't know why they're speeding past me and whatever, like, so I just think that the more Christians on a daily basis can look in front of them to the people around them and exercise compassion, perhaps letting someone go in front of you in line because they have less items. You got a whole cart and they've got 3 things. Dude, just let them go in front of you.
Yeah.
Or maybe it is like paying for the person next behind you or whatever they have. Like the more Christians can begin to do those types of things that are not necessarily seen, programmed, or advocated, or perhaps sometimes deemed sexy by the church at large, it's actually probably going to be more effective because it's grassroots, and I think it will be more organic in the way that it begins to create momentum.
Compassion seems like a disposition that shows itself through the way that you live and the action that you take and how you reach out and touch people. Figuratively, probably not so
AT&T.
much.
Reach out and touch someone.
Oh, is that
AT&T's slogan? It used to be.
I don't know.
They probably can't say that anymore.
I was like, that sounds like trouble. I don't know.
Reach out and touch someone. What is that?
Make sure it's someone that
is some
appropriate to
company's old phrase that they probably got rid of.
They probably got canceled. So but it's a disposition that you have to almost take, and and I appreciate your message because I think it's true that a lot of us kind of lose our capacity for compassion because we're so inundated by a lot of things that need to be, that demand our compassion or empathy. It seems like the demand for our empathy for everything is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
And if you're not an empathizer of everything, then you're a terrible person apparently.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to actually like say, okay, I'm gonna actually take action towards these things. But we've got to. We've got to become.
Yeah, I mean, if you choose not to be empathetic and compassionate to the people in your closest proximity, then you're going to look like a fraud. And those are the people that you know the best. So probably you know the things that you can be empathetic and compassionate towards the most. So I would say start there, but then kind of expand your periphery, so to speak, and begin to look outside of there to a person or a couple people or maybe an organization or a group, so that you're kind of having different drops of compassion in various buckets, but don't get overwhelmed to the point of thinking that I have to be compassionate to every single person that I see. Don't let your heart get hardened towards people.
Yeah.
But it's impossible. Like you cannot exercise compassion on every single person on the planet. That's ridiculous. But that's why Jesus, I think that's what was probably the thing I became most passionate about yesterday and finished with this, but like, was that I had never personally read Matthew 9:35 and 36 to raise up workers in the harvest as a I think a cry and a command for compassion.
Yeah.
I'd seen it as like go make disciples, which maybe those go hand in hand.
It's both. Yeah, I do.
But I
think
love
so
that
too.
Jesus gave that explanation to the disciples, saying like the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. And so we don't need to be convinced that the world has hurting and broken people and broken systems and things that need change and people need friendships and love and provision. We just don't have enough people at times saying, yes, I'll do that. And so the more that each person says, I will personally take responsibilities for saying yes in at least my sphere, and sometimes outside of my sphere, I think the movement of compassion will have a far greater impact and reach than if we expect a church to like, hey, organize a trip to Mexico. that's going to help.
It catalyzes.
It catalyzes, yeah, but it's not the end all. It's a way, but don't just rely on the church to create programs for you to be compassionate.
Yeah.
Be compassionate
Yeah.
just because that's the way of our Savior.
Sometimes those things are just training grounds.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of
Yeah.
feel like that's the destination, but sometimes that's just a training ground for when you get back home.
Yeah.
You know, you can go and build a house in Mexico and be compassionate there and find the tangibility of what compassion looks like.
Yeah.
So you can take it home to your neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know, and to the person who lives down the street that's all alone and
Yep.
doesn't know how to fix their own house. And so you can do it,
Yep. Absolutely.
whatever it looks like.
Yep.
So
I agree.
say yes.
Reach out and touch someone.
Reach out.
AT&T
I was right.
From 1984.
1984.
That was the year I was born,
Reach
Brandon.
out and touch someone. I knew it was there. I knew. But here's why I knew that. And this is actually a parental mistake, I think. But
Okay.
I watched Back to the Future with my kids this weekend.
Great one.
And it is a great movie until you have a 6-year-old and you're like, holy cow, there's a lot of language in this movie.
Oh, so I always watch the TV version.
Yeah, the TV version maybe edits the language, but like, so then all of a sudden, my 6-year-old's calling his brother butthead and saying damn and hell, and I'm like, whoa,
wait.
you know. But in Back to the Future, AT&T was there, and it said reach out and touch someone. The movie was made, I think, in 1985, 86, sometime in then. So
Okay, there you
that
go.
must have been in my head.
That was in your head. That's hilarious.
But AT&T has
Man.
killed that phrase since then.
Yes, for good reason, I'm sure.
Reach
So,
out and touch
that's
someone.
hilarious.
Robert, as we close,
Yeah,
who
please.
do you think that phrase would be the best slogan for, personally?
I would have to say Jean-Claude.
I was going to say Matt Heinersey.
Matt Heinersey. Oh, yes, Matt Heinersey.
That's his slogan. Reach out and touch someone
Well, I
or
was
hug
going to say
someone.
Pete Goodman. He
right.
wants to reach out and just give everyone.
Yes,
so if
he
you
does.
see Pete at church,
Give him a hug.
give
Reach
him a
out
hug.
and touch
Just give
someone.
him a big hug. He loves back rubs. He does not, by the way. So he's a very large man. Don't do it. It's a risky thing. So
Should we finish?
we should finish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, it was fun. Thanks for joining with us. This week is exciting. We have Baptism Sunday. It's a
big deal.
So I will be talking about ways in which Jesus said no, so we could ultimately say yes. But the ultimate yes we're going to look at is people saying yes to Jesus and publicly declaring their life to Him through baptism.
I'm
So
excited for it.
online, or if you are in San Diego area, be here. 9/11 baptisms, both services, celebrate new life in Christ, and then we'll talk about it on Digging Deeper next Monday.
Awesome. See you
All
then.
right. See you.